My brother-in-law, James, abandoned my 15-year-old son 1,300 miles from home with no money or phone to teach him respect. He forgot I was a lawyer. So, I worked with the police, built an ironclad case, and set a trap that got him fired, fined, and publicly shamed in front of his entire world. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The fluorescent lights of the 40th floor boardroom hummed, a sound I usually found comforting. The sound of order, of high-stakes negotiations going exactly as planned. I was in the middle of a sentence, outlining the compliance framework for a multi-billion-dollar merger, when my personal phone, set face down on the polished mahogany, began to vibrate. It wasn't the normal, polite buzz. It was the emergency override I had set for my son, Alex. I held up a hand, silencing the COO of a Fortune 500 company. "Gentlemen, I apologize, one moment." I stepped into the glass-walled alcove, my heart already a cold knot in my stomach. The caller ID wasn't Alex. It was an unknown number from a state I didn't recognize. I answered, "This is Laura." "Mom." The voice was small, cracked, and terrified. It was Alex, but it wasn't. The confident, slightly sarcastic teenager was gone, replaced by a child. "Alex, honey, what's wrong? Where are you? I thought you were with your Uncle James, driving back." "Mom, He choked on a sob, a sound that ripped through my professional calm and tore straight into my maternal core. "He left me. He left me." The boardroom, the merger, the entire city of Chicago outside the window, it all dissolved. My only reality was my son's voice. "Alex, slow down. Tell me exactly what happened. Where are you?" "I don't know, a gas station. Somewhere I think the sign said Nebraska." Nebraska. They were supposed to be driving through Illinois, maybe 8 hours from home. Nebraska was 1,300 miles away. A different time zone. A different world. "He took my phone," Alex wept, his voice breaking. "We got in a fight and he pulled over and told me to get out. He said I needed to learn a lesson about respect. He threw my bag on the ground and he just drove away, Mom. He left me here. I don't have any money. I had to ask the guy at the counter to use the phone. Mom, I'm scared." I leaned against the glass, my legs threatening to give out. My brother-in-law, James, my husband's older brother, the sanctimonious, self-righteous pillar of his community. He had abandoned my 15-year-old son in the middle of nowhere. A primal coldness, a clarity so sharp it hurt, settled over me. The panic was there, a screaming banshee in the back of my mind, but the lawyer, the protector, the mother took control. "Listen to me, Alex," I said, my voice dropping into the calm, measured tone I used in court. "You are safe. I am coming to get you. Do you hear me? You did the right thing by calling. Now I need you to be my eyes. Go back inside the gas station. Ask the clerk for the exact address, the town, and the name of the gas station. Write it down. Do not, under any circumstances, leave that building. Do not talk to anyone else. I am going to call the police in that town and have them come to you. You wait for an officer. Do you understand?" "Police," he whispered, horrified. "Yes, you are a minor who has been abandoned. This is a police matter. Now go, get me the address. I am hanging up for exactly 60 seconds to book a flight, and then I am calling this number back. You be ready with that information." I hung up, my fingers flying across the screen of my other phone, the work one. I booked the first flight to Omaha, a red-eye leaving in 3 hours. I didn't care about the cost. Then I dialed the gas station's number. A man with a slow, rural drawl answered, "Billy's Oasis." "My name is Laura," I said, my voice steel. "My 15-year-old son, Alex, is in your store. He was abandoned there by a family member. I am calling the local state police to come to your location right now. I need you to keep him safe until they arrive. Can you do that for me?" Abandoned? Good Lord. Yeah, the kid's right here. He's shaken up bad. Don't you worry, ma'am. I'll keep him by the counter. We'll get him a soda. He's safe here. Thank you, I breathed, a single crack in the armor. I walked back into the boardroom. The executives stared, their pens poised. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion but finality, "a critical family emergency has just occurred. This meeting is over. My team will be in touch to reschedule." I didn't wait for a reply. I grabbed my briefcase, my coat, and strode toward the elevator, dialing my husband, Nathan. He picked up on the second ring, cheerful. "Hey, hun, how's the—" "James left Alex at a gas station in Nebraska," I said, cutting him off. The silence on the other end was total. "What? That's not funny, Laura. They're probably just—" His phone died. "Nathan, I just spoke to him. He's 1,300 miles away. James took his phone, took his money, and abandoned him because he needed to learn respect. I'm on my way to O'Hare. I'm flying to Omaha to get him. I've already called the local police to pick him up." "James wouldn't. He wouldn't do that," Nathan stammered, the denial thick in his voice. I had no time for his disbelief, no patience for his lifelong habit of making excuses for his brother. "He did. And while I'm on a plane, you have one job, you get your brother on the phone, you find out what's in his head. But Nathan, this isn't a family squabble. This is a crime." I hung up and stepped into the elevator, the doors sliding shut on my old life. James had meant to teach my son a lesson. He had no idea the lesson he was about to learn. He had forgotten who I was, what I did for a living, and what I was capable of. The betrayal was worse than the act itself. It was a fundamental underestimation, and it would be his ruin. The next 12 hours were a masterclass in compartmentalization. The mother in me was a wreck, replaying Alex's terrified voice, imagining every horrible possibility. But the lawyer, Laura, was in full control. On the frantic drive to O'Hare, I coordinated with the Nebraska State Police. I spoke to a Sergeant Miller, a man with a calm, fatherly voice who instantly grasped the severity of the situation. He confirmed his troopers had located Alex at the Billy's Oasis. He was safe, and the gas station attendant had indeed given him a soda and a bag of chips. "Ma'am, your son is safe with us at the barracks," Sergeant Miller assured me. "He's scared, but he's okay. We've taken his preliminary statement." "Sergeant," I said, swerving around a semi-truck. "I'm a lawyer. I'm boarding a flight to Omaha now. I'll be renting a car and driving straight to you. I want to be clear. I am pressing charges for child abandonment and endangerment." "I don't blame you one bit," Miller said, his tone hardening. "We're already running the plates on the vehicle your son described. James, you said, we'll put out a bolo for the vehicle, though he's likely long gone. We'll have an officer ready to take your full statement when you arrive." I thanked him and hung up, my mind already pivoting. I called my husband, Nathan. "Did you reach him?" I asked, no preamble. Yeah, Nathan said. He sounded awful, hollowed out. "I reached him. He's already back in Iowa, almost home." And he admitted it, Laura. He said Alex was being unbearably disrespectful, questioning his beliefs, his authority. He said he just snapped and wanted to scare him straight. He said. He said he figured Alex would call us after a few hours of thinking about his actions. He sounded proud of it. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. Proud. He doesn't get it, Laura. He genuinely thinks he did a good thing, like something a strong father would do. He asked if Alex had called home with his tail between his legs yet. I told him what he'd done. I told him you'd called the police. He got quiet. Then he got angry. He said you were overreacting and trying to ruin him. Then he hung up on me. Nathan, I said, my voice dangerously quiet, I need you to understand what's happening. This is no longer a family dispute. James committed a felony. I am not overreacting. I am reacting. I know, he whispered. My own brother. Your brother, I stated, left my son, our son, for dead. You need to pick a side. Are you with me and Alex, or are you making excuses for James? Because I don't have the emotional bandwidth to manage you and this crisis. It was harsh, but it was necessary. I needed him to shed his lifelong role as the placating younger brother. I'm with you, he said, his voice firmer. I'm with Alex. What do you need? I need you to go to the house, pack a bag for Alex with his comfort items, his laptop, his headphones, his favorite hoodie. And I need you to wait. I'll call you when I have him. I hung up and boarded the plane. The flight was a blur. I sat in first class, a stark white gin and tonic untouched on the tray table, my laptop open. I wasn't watching a movie. I was researching Nebraska state statutes on child abandonment. I was outlining a civil complaint. I was drafting discovery requests. I landed in Omaha, rented a nondescript Ford sedan, and drove 2 hours through the dark, empty expanse of the state, fueled by a terrifying, cold rage. I walked into the state police barracks at 3:00 a.m. Alex saw me from across the room, and he simply broke. He ran to me, and this tall, lanky kid who was all knees and elbows, who hadn't let me hug him for more than a few seconds in a year, burrowed his face into my shoulder and sobbed like he was 5 years old. I held him, my eyes closed, just breathing him in. He was safe. He was alive. After a few minutes, Sergeant Miller gently cleared his throat. I gave him a nod, and we sat down, Alex still clutching my hand. Alex recounted the story. The argument had been about music, of all things. Alex had said that James's conservative church music was boring and that he didn't see why he couldn't listen to his own playlist. James had escalated, calling Alex's music garbage and his generation godless and disrespectful. Alex, in a typical 15-year-old move, had muttered, "Whatever, man. At least my godless music doesn't put people to sleep." That's when James had lost it. He'd pulled the car over, yanked Alex out, thrown his bag, confiscated his phone, and spat. You want to be a man? You can act like one. You can find your own way home. You need to learn a lesson about respect. Then he'd gotten back in his luxury SUV and sped off, leaving Alex in a cloud of dust. I listened, my expression unreadable. I gave my own statement, provided James's full name, address, and place of employment. As we walked out to the rental car, the sun was just beginning to streak the horizon with gray light. Alex was exhausted, already half asleep in the passenger seat. I looked at his face, pale and tear-stained, and the coldness in my core crystallized. It became a diamond. It became a weapon. James thought he was punishing a child. He fundamentally forgot that he was starting a war with a lawyer. And I never, ever lose a case that matters. The drive back to Chicago was 1,300 miles of quiet resolve. Alex slept for most of it, a deep, trauma-induced exhaustion. I drove, my mind a whirring engine of legal strategy and simmering fury. To understand James, you have to understand my husband's family. Nathan, my husband, is a kind, gentle, brilliant man. He's a software engineer who sees the world in lines of code, logical, fixable, and ultimately cooperative. His older brother, James, is the opposite. James sees the world as a kingdom, with himself as the ordained, righteous king. For as long as I've known him, James has been a sanctimonious bully. He's a highly successful realtor in his mid-sized Iowa city, but his real power, his real identity, comes from his position as a senior deacon at his massive, influential evangelical church. He doesn't just attend church, he is the church. He sits on the financial board, he leads the men's ministry, and his voice carries the weight of moral authority, an authority he wields like a club. From the moment Nathan introduced me, James disapproved. I was, in his eyes, everything a woman shouldn't be. Educated at a secular university, outspoken, and worst of all, a godless career woman who worked as a corporate lawyer in a sinful city. He believed my ambition was a flaw, that my place was at home, supporting my husband and raising my children in his church. When Alex was born, James's judgment only intensified. He viewed our parenting as soft and coddled. We were raising Alex with critical thinking, with the freedom to question and debate. James believed in breaking a child's will, in demanding absolute, unquestioning respect for one's elders. Alex, being my son, was naturally inquisitive, bright, and had a low tolerance for hypocrisy. This, in James's eyes, was not intelligence. It was a profound character flaw that he, as the family's patriarch by default, felt obligated to correct. For 15 years, Nathan had played the peacemaker. Every cutting remark from James, every condescending prayer for my wayward family, every backhanded compliment about our worldly success was met with Nathan's diffusing. "Oh, that's just James. He means well." "He doesn't mean well, Nathan," I'd argued countless times over dinner. "He's a bully. He uses his faith as a shield to be cruel." "He's just old-fashioned," Nathan would sigh, unwilling to create a rift. "It's how he was raised, just ignore him." I had ignored him for Nathan's sake. I had endured Christmases where James would loudly pray for Alex's confused soul. I had sat through Thanksgivings where he'd corner me to lecture me on the dangers of my secular humanist influence on my son. I had held my tongue, treating him with the same polite, professional distance I would a rabid opposing counsel. But this trip, this was supposed to be a bridge. Nathan had begged me. "James is taking his own son, Matthew, on a character-building camping trip," he'd said. "He invited Alex. It would mean the world to him, Laura. A chance for them to bond. For James to see what a good kid Alex really is." I had relented. Against every instinct in my body, I had relented. Alex, for his part, had been lukewarm. He liked his cousin Matthew, but found his uncle James creepy and intense. Still, he'd agreed for his dad's sake. And now, driving through the flat, endless fields of Iowa, I really zed the full depth of my mistake. I had handed my son over to a man who didn't see him as a nephew, but as a project, a will to be broken, a soul to be saved, even if it meant destroying him. We got home late at night. Nathan was waiting on the porch, his face etched with worry. He saw Alex, pale and drawn, and his composure broke. He hugged his son, tears streaming down his face, whispering, "I'm so sorry, Alex. I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I never should have let you go." Alex, too tired to speak, just nodded and went upstairs to his room, closing the door behind him. Nathan turned to me, his eyes pleading. "Laura." "Don't," I said, holding up a hand. I was too tired for "I told you so," too angry for comfort. What I said on the phone stands. This isn't a family squabble. This is a legal proceeding. I've already retained a criminal lawyer in Nebraska, and the police there are taking this very seriously. I'm filing for an emergency order of protection for Alex in the morning. An order of protection against my brother. Nathan looked like I'd slapped him. Yes, he is a clear and present danger to our son. He is not to come within 500 feet of Alex, nor is he to contact him, me, or you. He won't, Laura, he must know he crossed a line. He doesn't, I said, my voice flat. A man who can do that to a child doesn't have lines. He has justifications. And I am done letting him use our family to prove his moral superiority. I walked past him and into my home office, shutting the door. The anger was so pure it was almost silent. James had hidden behind his polished appearance, his vague but impressive-sounding profession, and his holy reputation for his entire life. He had spent years subtly, and not so subtly, questioning my fitness as a mother, my profession, my worth. He had just made the single greatest mistake of his life. He had brought the battle into my arena. He thought he was a deacon. He was about to find out what it felt like to be a defendant. The next morning, I shifted from passive victim to active strategist. The shift was as natural as breathing. In my world, when you are attacked, you don't just defend, you countersue. You don't just block, you dismantle. Alex was traumatized. He stayed in his room, the door closed. He wasn't talking, not to me, not to Nathan. He was just gone. The quiet, constant hum of his gaming computer was the only sign he was even awake. My husband, Nathan, drifted through the house like a ghost, his face a mask of guilt and shame. He'd left a dozen voicemails for James, none of which were returned. This was no longer just about punishment. This was about justice for Alex. James had inflicted a wound that therapy and time might heal, but my job was to ensure the man who inflicted it was held accountable in every conceivable way. My clever trap wasn't a single item. It was my entire professional existence. It was my network, my understanding of regulatory bodies, and my ability to read the fine print of a man's life until I found the flaw in his foundation. My first call was not to a family therapist. It was to a man named Rick Evans. Rick was a private investigator, a former financial crimes detective from Chicago PD. He was expensive, discreet, and utterly ruthless. I had used his firm twice before to dig into the opaque finances of shell corporations during hostile takeovers. "Laura," he answered, his voice gravelly. "Been a while. What multi-million-dollar empire is burning today?" "A much smaller one," I said, pacing my office. "My brother-in-law, James, he's a realtor and a prominent church deacon in Davenport, Iowa. He thinks he's untouchable. I want you to find out if he is." "Davenport," Rick scoffed. "Small pond, what am I looking for?" "Everything," I said. "Start with his real estate business. He markets himself as a Christian realtor. I want to know if his practices align with his piety. Check for ethics complaints, client reviews, anything that smells off. But the real target is the church. He sits on the financial board. I want to know everything. How he votes, who he associates with, and specifically, if he's ever used his church position to his professional advantage. I want you to find out where he gets his clients. Got it, Rick said. He's a big fish in a small religious pond. I've seen the type. They often forget the thou shalt not steal part when it comes to commission. Exactly, I said. I'll wire the retainer in 10 minutes. I want a preliminary report by the end of the week. My second call was to the Nebraska State's Attorney's Office, Criminal Division. I'd already faxed over my formal statement and the emergency protective order I'd filed in Illinois. I spoke with a young, sharp deputy prosecutor named Sarah Jenkins. Ms. Harris, she said, I've reviewed the file. Sergeant Miller's report is thorough. To be honest, this is one of the more black-and-white child abandonment cases I've seen. We are absolutely moving forward with charges. We'll be issuing a warrant for his arrest. Thank you, I said. I'm a lawyer myself, so you know I'm not going to be a difficult victim's parent. I'm here to provide anything you need. But I also need you to understand the full context. This wasn't just recklessness. This was a calculated act of cruelty intended to teach a lesson. I need that reflected when it comes to the sentencing recommendations. Understood, Sarah replied, her voice appreciative. We'll be in touch. The warrant was issued that afternoon. It was official. James was now a wanted man. The protective order was granted by an Illinois judge the same day. A copy was served to James at his home in Iowa. The first domino had fallen. For 2 days, the house was silent. Then, on Wednesday evening, Nathan's phone rang. It was James. I nodded at Nathan, pointing to the speakerphone button, and hit record on my own device. Nathan, what is this? James's voice wasn't calm or righteous. It was a high-pitched, panicked screech. The police were at my house. They served me with a restraining order. Your wife is insane, Nathan. She's trying to ruin me. Nathan, to his credit, found his spine. You abandoned my son, James. You left him 1,300 miles from home. What did you think was going to happen? I was teaching him respect. He's a disrespectful, mouthy kid. I did what our father would have done. And now she's called the police. In Nebraska, they have a warrant for me, Nathan. A warrant for what? Disciplining my own nephew. I decided it was time to speak. Hello, James, I said, my voice as cold and clear as ice water. This is Laura. The line went completely silent. He hadn't known I was there. You, he finally spat, his voice dripping with a venom I had never heard from him. You did this. You crazy, godless. You're trying to destroy my life. Destroying your life, James, I said, would be me leaving you stranded in a hostile environment with no money and no way to call for help. What I'm doing is called consequences. I'm just here to ask one simple question for the police report I'm holding. What report? He stammered. The one from the Nebraska State Police. They just want to confirm the exact address of the gas station where you abandoned my 15-year-old son. Was it the Billy's Oasis off I-80 or a different one? They want to make sure they have the crime scene correct. Can you confirm that address for me, James, for the report? I heard a sharp intake of breath. The word crime scene had hit its mark. The arrogant facade of the church deacon shattered, and the sniveling, panicked bully underneath was exposed. You can't do this to me, he whispered, his bravado gone. I'm your family. I'm I'm a good man. I'm a pillar of this community. This will ruin me. I'll lose my license. I'll be removed from the church board." "Yes," I said, "you will. You seem to finally understand the gravity of your actions. Now, let me be perfectly clear. This is not a negotiation. You will not contact my husband, you will not contact my son, and you will not contact me. The next time you hear from me will be through my attorney or the state's attorney's office. If you try to contact any of us, I will consider it a violation of the protective order and have you arrested. Goodbye, James." I hung up. Nathan was pale, staring at the phone as if it were a snake. He really didn't get it, he said, his voice full of a strange, pained awe. He didn't think he'd done anything wrong until it affected him. "They never do," I said. The next morning, Rick Evans's preliminary report hit my inbox. It was better and worse than I could have ever imagined. "This guy ain't just a bully, Laura," Rick's email began. "He's a predator hiding in plain sight. This is big." James, it turned out, had a very specific business model. He used his position on the church's benevolence committee to identify elderly members of the congregation who were struggling, either financially or just with the upkeep of their large, paid-off homes. He would approach them not as a realtor, but as a Christian brother and financial guide. He would advise them to sell their burdensome homes, move into smaller church-affiliated assisted living, and donate a portion of their home's equity to the church's building fund, a fund which, coincidentally, he managed. And of course, he would offer his services as their realtor, taking a full, non-negotiable 6% commission, while his own firm also charged them exorbitant consulting and staging fees. He was double-dipping, using his holy position to pressure vulnerable people into selling their single greatest asset and then skimming from them at every step. Rick had found 2 families who were suspicious, and one former church elder who had been quietly forced out by James after questioning the ethics of these transactions. I closed the laptop, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. James hadn't just committed a crime against my son, he had a history, he had a pattern. I now had an ironclad legal case, and I had something even better. I had leverage. The phone call had been the appetizer. The main course was yet to come. Rick's report gave me the weapon I needed to dismantle James's entire life, not just the part that had intersected with mine. This was no longer just about the felony in Nebraska. This was about a pattern of predatory behavior. I spent the next 2 days preparing 2 identical packages. They were professional, bound, and tabbed, just like a final argument binder I would prepare for court. Inside each was a copy of the filed police report from the Nebraska State Police, a copy of the active arrest warrant for James, a copy of the emergency order of protection, now formally served, Rick's full report, including the financial analysis of James's real estate transactions, sworn, notarized affidavits from the 2 elderly families Rick had interviewed, detailing how James had counseled them to sell their homes, a signed affidavit from the former church elder, describing how James had threatened his reputation and had him removed from the board for sowing discord when he questioned the ethics. Package A was addressed to the state of Iowa's Real Estate Licensing and Ethics Board. Package B was addressed to the senior pastor and the board of elders at James's church. I was about to set fire to both pillars of his life, But before I sent them, I needed to see my husband, Nathan. He was in his study, staring blankly at a screen of code. "Nathan," I said, placing one of the binders on his desk, "I need you to read this." He opened it. I watched his face as he read. He started with the police report, which he already knew. But then he got to Rick's investigation. I saw his skin go gray. I saw his hand begin to tremble as he read the affidavits from the elderly couples, people he knew, people he'd probably shared potluck dinners with. He read the final affidavit from the disgraced elder, a man named Mr. Henderson, whom Nathan had always respected. He finished, closed the binder, and was silent for a full minute. He looked up at me, and the last shred of brotherly loyalty in his eyes had been burned away, replaced by a cold, unfamiliar fury. "He's a monster," Nathan whispered. "He's been using the church. He's been robbing people, old people. Mr. Henderson, James told everyone he had a private moral failing and stepped down. He's a predator, Nathan, and he's been hiding behind his Bible for years," I said. "I'm sending this binder to the real estate board and to his church leadership. I wanted you to see it first." "Good," Nathan said, his voice hard. "Send it. Burn him to the ground." "I'm sending them," I said, "but I think we need to deliver one in person." A few days later, James made a fatal error. He broke the protective order. A package arrived at our house. Inside was a large ornate family Bible. Tucked inside was a handwritten letter, not to me or Nathan, but to Alex. It was not an apology. It was a justification. It was 4 pages of scripture, quoting passages about a foolish son and the rod of correction. It ended with the line, "I pray you will use your time of reflection to soften your heart and accept the Lord's discipline, which I was merely an instrument for. Your Uncle James." Alex, who had finally emerged from his room, read the letter, and all the color drained from his face. He looked at me, his eyes wide. "He still thinks I'm the one who's wrong." "That's it," I said, my voice final. I picked up my phone. "Nathan, we're going to Iowa, tonight." Nathan met me at the door, his jaw set. "What about the order?" "He just broke it," I said, holding up the letter. "This is witness tampering and harassment. He thinks he's above the law. We're going to his church. He's having a men's ministry leadership dinner tonight. I saw it on their website. It's time to deliver this information publicly." The drive to Iowa was 2 hours of silent, focused rage. We arrived at the massive, modern-looking campus of James's church. We walked straight past the greeters and into the fellowship hall, a large room set up for a banquet. About 50 men, all in suits or nice sweaters, were milling about. And there at the head table, holding court, was James. He saw us. His face, which had been smiling and magnanimous, froze. He saw the binder in my hand and the look on Nathan's face. He started to stand up, his chair scraping loudly. "Nathan, Laura, what? What are you doing here? You're not welcome." "We're here to see Pastor Miles," I said, my voice carrying across the now silent room. I spotted the senior pastor, a man with silver hair, looking confused. "James," Nathan said, and his voice was a revelation. It was deep, powerful, and held none of his usual deference. "You broke the protective order." What order?" James blustered, looking around at the other men who were all staring. "I sent my nephew a Bible." "You sent him a letter of justification," I said, walking directly to Pastor Miles. "Pastor, my name is Laura Harris. This is my husband, Nathan, James's brother. I apologize for the interruption, but this is a matter of criminal and spiritual urgency." "Criminal?" Pastor Miles looked at James, then back at me. "James," I said, turning to face him, "you lied. You told Nathan you snapped. But here, in this letter you sent my son, you are still justifying your actions." "This is a family matter," James yelled, his face turning a blotchy red. "You're embarrassing yourselves." "Was it a family matter when you drove my 15-year-old son 1,300 miles from home?" I asked, my voice rising to project to every corner of the room. "Was it a family matter when you stole his phone and his money and abandoned him at a gas station in Nebraska to teach him a lesson?" A collective gasp went through the room. The men looked at James, their faces twisting in horror. "She's lying," James shrieked. "She's a vindictive secular." "Am I lying about the arrest warrant, James?" I asked, pulling the document from the binder. "Am I lying about the Nebraska State Police? Am I lying about the protective order you just violated?" I threw the binder onto the head table in front of Pastor Miles. "This is the police report, Pastor," I said. "But that's just what he did to my family. What you'll find on page 12 is what he's been doing to your family, to your flock." James's face went from red to chalk white. He knew what was in the binder. You're the devil," he whispered, staring at me. "No, James," Nathan said, stepping forward, his voice shaking but strong. "You're just a bully and a thief. And for the first time in your life, you're facing someone you can't scare." Pastor Miles opened the binder. He read the first page, then the second. His face hardened. He looked up at James with eyes that had seen sin before, but never like this, not from his own leadership. "James," the pastor said, his voice a low thunder, "come with me to my office. Now." James, for the first time in his life, looked small. He looked like a child who had been caught. He sputtered, tried to find words, but none came. He just stared at the binder, his entire life, his reputation, his kingdom, all burning down on a banquet table. He had tried to break my son. Instead, he had just broken himself. The confrontation at the church dinner was the turning point, but not the end. It was the moment the antagonist's spell was broken, but the case itself was just beginning to build. James, true to his nature, did not go quietly. He was a cornered animal, and he lashed out. The following day, I received a frantic call from the senior partner at my law firm. "Laura, what in God's name is going on?" he asked. "I just got a call from a Pastor Miles in Iowa, and then not 10 minutes later, a letter from a lawyer representing your brother-in-law, James. The letter is accusing you of harassment, slander, and malicious persecution. He's threatening to sue you, and by extension, the firm." I leaned back in my office chair. He can't sue for slander if it's true, and he can't sue for harassment when I'm the victim's mother cooperating with a criminal investigation. "Don't worry, David. I've already notified our malpractice carrier and given them the full file. This is a personal matter, but it's fully documented. James is just saber-rattling. He's desperate." "Desperate is one word," David said. The pastor, on the other hand, was deeply disturbed. He wanted to confirm the authenticity of the documents you provided. "I told him you were one of the most meticulous lawyers I'd ever known, and that if you provided a document, it was ironclad. He seemed to appreciate that. He said they were holding an emergency board meeting." James's desperate attempt to regain control was to paint me as the aggressor, as a hysterical woman and a vindictive lawyer out to destroy a man of God. He was trying to muddy the waters, to turn this into a he said, she said battle of credibility. It was a foolish move. He was playing checkers and I was playing chess. While James was busy threatening me, Rick Evans, my private investigator, was closing his net. My initial investigation was just the start. Now that the church's leadership was on high alert, other victims began to find their voice. Rick called me 3 days after the church dinner. "It's an avalanche, Laura," he said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "That former elder you spoke to, Henderson, he's now the church's star witness. After you and your husband left, he was called into the emergency meeting. He gave them everything. And now, 2 more families have come forward. One of them is the widow of the church's founder. James apparently convinced her to sell her 40-acre property to a developer he's in business with, for pennies on the dollar, telling her it was God's will that the land be used for a new youth center. The developer paid her, then sold half the land to a big box store for 10 times the price, and donated the other half to the church. James's commission on the original sale was over $100,000. "My God," I whispered, "he's not just a predator, he's a one-man crime syndicate." "The Iowa Real Estate Board seems to think so," Rick continued. "They received your package. They've opened a formal investigation and have provisionally suspended his license, effective immediately, pending the outcome. He's dead in the water professionally." The full, shocking extent of James's deception was now clear. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment with Alex. This was a long-standing, calculated pattern of abuse, using his reputation as a shield. But there was still a problem. My husband, Nathan. While he was firmly on my side, he was struggling. This was his brother, his blood. He'd received a dozen tearful, manipulative voicemails from their mother, who had been fed a story by James about how Laura's hatred was tearing the family apart. "She doesn't believe me, Laura," Nathan said one night, his head in his hands. "She thinks this is a simple family argument that you've taken too far. She wants us to drop the charges against James. She said, think of his children." "What about our child?" I said, my voice rising. "What about Alex?" I know, he said, "but this is hard." He was still struggling with his loyalty. I realized then that Nathan needed to be the one to land the final blow. He needed to be the one to see it through, for his own sake as much as for Alex's. The opportunity came a week later. The church board had concluded its internal investigation. Pastor Miles called Nathan, not me. He asked if we would be willing to attend a final accountability meeting. James and his wife would be there. James, he said, had offered to make a statement. "It's a trap," I told Nathan. "He's going to play the victim. He'll cry, he'll repent, he'll beg for forgiveness, and he'll try to pressure you, as his brother, to show Christian mercy and drop the charges." "Then I'll be there," Nathan said, his eyes hardening, "and I'll bring this." He held up a thin file. It was the report from Alex's new therapist. Alex had been diagnosed with acute anxiety and PTSD as a direct result of the abandonment. He was having nightmares. He was afraid to be alone. "He wants to talk about forgiveness," Nathan said, his voice cold. "Let's talk about the cost of what needs to be forgiven." We were going back to Iowa, but this time it wouldn't be a confrontation, it would be a sentencing, and Nathan would be the one to deliver it. The accountability meeting was held not in the Grand Fellowship Hall, but in the church library, a somber room lined with dark wood and theological texts. It felt like a tribunal. Pastor Miles sat at the head of a long table, flanked by the 4 remaining board elders. James and his wife, Sarah, sat on one side. Nathan and I sat on the other. James looked like a different man. His usual tailored suit was gone, replaced by a rumpled shirt. His face was puffy, his eyes red. He looked broken. His wife, Sarah, just stared at the table, her expression blank. "Thank you for coming, Nathan, Laura," Pastor Miles began, his voice heavy. "We have concluded our internal investigation based on the documents you provided and our own subsequent findings. James, as you know, has been asked to speak." James looked up, his eyes immediately finding Nathan's. He didn't look at me. He knew I was a lost cause. His only hope was his brother. "Nathan," James began, his voice thick with a practiced theatrical emotion. "Nate, I don't know what to say. I've been under so much pressure. Business hasn't been good and I lost my way. I lost my temper." He paused, clearly waiting for Nathan to interject to say, "It's okay." Nathan just stared, his expression unreadable. "What I did to Alex, it was wrong," James continued, tears welling in his eyes. "It was a terrible mistake, a lapse in judgment. I am a sinner. I have sinned against God, and I have sinned against you, my family. I am on my knees begging for your forgiveness." He put his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs. His wife, on cue, put a hand on his back, rubbing circles. It was a perfect performance of contrition. We've already lost so much," James choked out, looking at Pastor Miles. "They've suspended my license. I can't provide for my family. Laura, Nathan, if this criminal charge goes through, I'll go to jail. My life will be over. My children will be ruined. Please, I'm your brother. I'm asking for mercy. Please tell the prosecutor you want to drop the charges." The elders looked uncomfortable. Pastor Miles looked at Nathan. The entire room was holding its breath, waiting for Nathan, the long-suffering, peacemaking younger brother, to do what he had always done: smooth things over. Nathan was silent for a long time. He looked down at the file in his lap. Then he looked up, not at James, but at Pastor Miles. "Pastor," Nathan said, his voice clear and calm, "thank you for letting us be here. James speaks of sin. He speaks of a lapse in judgment. I'd like to talk about consequences." He opened the file. "This is a report from my son's therapist. My 15-year-old son, Alex. He's been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. He has panic attacks if he's left alone for too long. He has nightmares that he's being abandoned. He's on medication for acute anxiety. Your lapse in judgment, James, did this to him." James flinched as if he'd been struck. "You talk about your Hildren," Nathan continued, his voice rising, gaining a power I had never heard. "You left my child. You didn't just lose your temper. You made 1,000 calculated, cruel decisions. You decided to take his phone. You decided to take his money. You decided to drive him to a desolate gas station. You decided to leave him there, 1,300 miles from anyone who loved him. And then you decided to drive away and not tell his parents." Nathan stood up, leaning his hands on the table. "And that," he said, his voice dropping to a low, furious growl, "was just what you did to us. For 10 years, this board has let you run your benevolence committee. How benevolent were you, James, when you strong-armed the Hendersons into selling their home? How benevolent were you when you preyed on Mrs. Davies, a widow, and stole her family's land for a kickback?" The elders sat bolt upright. James's wife gasped, finally looking up. What is he talking about, James? She whispered. He's lying, James screamed, jumping to his feet. He's making it up. It was all good business. I was helping them. You were helping yourself. Nathan roared, all pretense of calm gone. You used this church. You used your title. You used God Himself as a shield to hide the fact that you are a common thief and a bully. Nathan turned to Pastor Miles. You want to know if we'll drop the charges? No, absolutely not. He will face the criminal charges in Nebraska, and as for what he did here, to your church, that's on your conscience, but our family is done. You are not my brother, James. You are just the man who traumatized my son. It was a total, systematic dismantling. James stood there, exposed, his performance of repentance shattered, revealing the ugly, greedy, and cruel man beneath. His wife, Sarah, looked at the elders, then at her husband, her face white with dawning, sickening realization. She stood up, grabbed her purse, and without a word walked out of the room. James collapsed back into his chair, a broken, empty man. The public shaming was complete. His two worlds, church and family, had collided, and he had been crushed between them. Pastor Miles, his face a grim mask, looked at James. James, I think you need to leave. We will be in touch regarding the next steps, which will include a full, independent forensic audit of the church's finances. James didn't move. He just stared at the empty chair where his wife had been. His downfall was absolute. The fallout from that final meeting was swift and total. James's ruin was not a single event, but a cascade of failures, each one triggering the next. Legally, the criminal case in Nebraska moved forward. Faced with the irrefutable evidence, the police report, Alex's testimony, and the testimony of the gas station attendant, James's lawyer knew he had no defense. The deputy DA, Sarah Jenkins, pushed hard. James was facing a felony conviction, which meant jail time and the permanent, irrevocable loss of his real estate license. His lawyer, seeing the writing on the wall, called me directly. He proposed a deal. James would plead guilty to a lesser charge, a gross misdemeanor for reckless endangerment and child abuse, sparing Alex from having to testify. In exchange, he would agree to a massive civil settlement. I conferred with Nathan and Alex. I don't want to go to court, Alex said, his voice quiet. I want him to go away, and I want him to pay for what he did. We accepted. The civil settlement was ironclad. James was forced to liquidate his assets, including his beloved luxury SUV and his vacation property. The settlement paid for 4 years of Alex's future college tuition, a donation to a national hotline for runaway teens, and, of course, all of Alex's ongoing and future therapy costs. The court also fined him heavily and sentenced him to 3 years of probation and 1,000 hours of community service. The terms of the protective order were extended for 5 years. Professionally, he was finished. The Iowa Real Estate Board, armed with my binder and the affidavits from the church members, permanently revoked his license. The headline in the Davenport Gazette read, "Prominent church deacon and realtor loses license over gross misconduct and predatory ethics violations." He was fired from his realty firm the same day. Socially, he was in exile. The church, after their forensic audit, publicly removed him as a deacon and made a formal, public apology to the congregation. They announced the creation of a restitution fund for the families, like the Hendersons and Mrs. Davies, whom James had defrauded. His wife, Sarah, filed for divorce within a month, taking their children and moving back to her hometown in a different state. James was left alone, in a house he could no longer afford, with no job, no family, and no reputation. Our family, on the other hand, began to heal. The reconciliation between Alex and Nathan was the most profound. Nathan, having finally stood up to his brother, had also broken the cycle of passivity. He was present for Alex in a way he had never been before, attending therapy sessions with him, listening, and taking accountability for his part in letting James's behavior go unchecked for so long. "I'm sorry, Alex," I heard him say to our son one evening in the kitchen. "I spent your whole life trying to keep the peace, and I didn't realize I was sacrificing you to do it. That will never happen again. My only job is to protect you. I see that now." Alex, who had been so quiet and withdrawn, just nodded, and for the first time in months, gave his dad a real hug. A few months later, I received a package. It was a small, carved wooden box. Inside was a simple, handwritten note. It was from Mr. Henderson, the former church elder. "Dear Mrs. Harris," it read, "the lawyers call what you did justice. Pastor Miles calls it righteousness. I just call it the truth coming to light. You gave a voice to those of us who had been silenced. You were an answer to a prayer I didn't even know how to speak. Thank you." I closed the note, a sense of profound, quiet peace settling over me. James had set out to teach my son a lesson about respect. In the end, he was the one who got the education.